For all of the prayers of our hearts, I lift up thanks and gratitude today. Amen. So, when asked about the difference between science fiction and fantasy, someone once said that it depended on the number of unicorns. Now, I have personally always enjoyed the fantasy genre, enjoying a high population of mythical beasts in my stories. So it is no surprise, probably, that I quickly came to love the world of Game of Thrones. And I have waded through each of those 1,000-page doorstops in my free time. They are set in a medieval-like world where various royal families battle each other for rule over the Westeros kingdom. The series is incomplete, and there are another 2 books that are slated to come out. This week, as I was looking on Facebook, I saw an article that said, Game of Thrones author George R.R. Martin to feature aliens, pixies, and Dracula in the next installment. It turned out to be a joke, but before I realized the satire of it, I actually thought, that sounds terrible, and what's even worse is that I'm probably still going to read it. This week, I was thinking about a motif in these books and in several other fantasy novels. It's the motif of the journey or the quest, and I noticed that the introit today was from Tolkien, and the idea that the road goes on and on. It's very much fits with this, the journey of the theme of the journey or the quest. In Game of Thrones, the journey is most clearly present in the storyline of Brienne of Tarth. She is a fierce knight and holds the distinction of being the only woman in Westeros to have that role. She faces sexism and brutality from those who think she does not deserve the honor of being called a knight because of her gender. But she dedicates her life to serving one of the royal families and never wavers from that duty. And when the daughters of that royal family are abducted and go missing, she pursues them, persevering through incredible difficulty to find them. It is a familiar theme in fantasy literature. Brienne goes on a mission, a quest. And because she has this singular focus, she's able to overcome terrible obstacles on the way towards accomplishing it. Her dedication to her goal causes her to overcome hunger and thirst, not sleeping for days, attacks on her person, her own abduction and escape. One of her best quotes as she is attacked by yet another male foe is this: "All my life I have been attacked by men like you, and all my life I have knocked men like you into the dust." I love that. Brienne of Tarth is the fantasy embodiment of what the psychologist Angela Duckworth would call grit. Duckworth is an author and psychologist who's studied the reason that people succeed. Her book, Grit, The Power and Passion of Perseverance, is dedicated to discovering the root of why people persevere and find success. Duckworth had the hunch that there was more to success than raw talent when she began teaching a middle school math class in Brooklyn. It seemed that the students with the highest intellectual aptitude were not necessarily the ones who did the best in her courses. Rather, it was the hardest workers who did the best. Wanting to more deeply understand this phenomenon, she went on to get her PhD in psychology. She interviewed hundreds of students and developed a scale for how we can measure grit. Her work is influenced by her professor, Martin Seligman, who is known for the concept of learned optimism. Basically, this is the idea that a pessimistic attitude is a maladaptive trait, and one can learn optimism towards one's own circumstances, and that will help in overcoming obstacles. This view is omnipresent in her work. Basically, if one adopts a positive, gritty attitude, one can persevere through the most difficult circumstances. If one fails, it's largely because that attitude is deficient. Duckworth's outlook has become so popular that some schools in California have actually begun to build a grit component into their curriculum. These educators have developed a list of gritty attributes that students need to learn. What they came up with was zest, optimism, self-control, social intelligence, gratitude, and curiosity. These traits, they say, are necessary for building a character able to persevere through difficulty and to achieve success. Now, it's not hard to admire grit. That's why fantasy stories are so appealing. We get to see characters who should, by all counts, have been knocked into the dust. But instead of collapsing, they persevere. They push through. They exhibit formidable strength to overcome obstacles. As I said at the beginning of this sermon, I love these stories and I read them regularly. But I have also come to believe, alongside the unicorns and the dragons in that literature, that such strength can be yet another fantastical element. At the end of the day, I have some deep reservations about such characters, and I also have problems with the real-life counterparts in Duckworth's book. What could I possibly have against grit? Well, here's a few things. First, I do not believe that stopping the pursuit of a particular goal is necessarily a failure. But Duckworth seems to hang a lot of her work on that notion. For instance, she praises as gritty the people who make it through a particularly harsh and often painful training at the West Point Military Academy, implying that the ones who do not make it lack grit. But those 18-year-olds might succeed in all sorts of other things. It might simply turn out that that particular training was not for them. I know I have tried plenty of things that I have stopped early, including a brief stint in the Boy Scouts, dreaming briefly of becoming a journalist, starting the book War and Peace and then quickly putting it down, and even contemplating a skydiving adventure. It's a harsh judgment to insist that it's a failure not to persevere to success in all of those endeavors. Life is simply bigger than that and has other things to offer. Second, I believe that the character traits that are being taught in the grit curriculum, such as self-control and optimism and zest, they're nice and they're good, but they're incomplete. While these may help someone succeed personally by improving attitude, they have nothing to say about how one should treat other people. This is supposed to be a list of virtues, and yet fairness, justice, compassion, and generosity are nowhere in them. Other human traits that I deeply admire in people, such as creativity, kindness, and introspection, do not have a place in that scheme either. They might actually be seen as distractions from the gritty attributes that allow someone to succeed. The traits that are detailed alongside grit seem to be quite instrumental to achieving career success. They fit neatly within a capitalist market economy. That's good as far as it goes, but no doubt misses something important about our humanity, I think. The third and last thing that I worry about with the attitude of grit is the philosophical approach that it takes towards life. It seems to look at life as a series of obstacles that need to be surmounted by sheer will. And I am not sure that I buy that understanding of life. This week, I met with our Chalice Circle facilitators, which is our small group ministry program. And we talked about the theme of perseverance, which is what these groups will be exploring this month. And many of us talked about our personal difficulties that we had to engage with, that we had to persevere through. I talked about grief and what it meant for me to live through my hardest loss, the loss of my husband. And what I found was not that I had to overcome the obstacle of my partner's death. That would not have been a helpful way for me to understand that process. Instead, my work was to find ways to hold that difficulty and that pain, to live authentically with that loss, and finally to discover connections with others who had gone through similar struggles. This was a winding path, and there was no clear, shiny prize at the end. My heart was broken wide open, and it wasn't in pushing through, but rather in embracing that broken openness that I discovered my own ability to be in the world with that grief. Persevering through loss, an experience so key to who we are as human beings, is more complex than whether or not someone has grit. To persevere through loss, one needs to discover new ways of being in the world, not simply how to overcome it. Eric Greitens captures this by saying, life's reality is that we do not bounce back. We do not bounce back. We cannot bounce back because we cannot go back in time to the people that we used to be. The parent who loses a child never bounces back. The 19-year-old who sails for war is gone forever, even if he returns. You know that there is no bouncing back. There's only moving through. What happens to us becomes a part of us. Resilient people do not bounce back from hard experiences. Instead, they find ways to integrate those experiences into their lives and into the ways that they are in the world. Now, one of the more thoughtful novels that captures this truth is Kazuo Ishiguro's The Buried Giant. His novel takes a lot of the themes of the fantasy genre, including the quest or journey, and inverts them. The story begins with an elderly couple, Axel and Beatrice, who have not seen their son in years. But the details about why they have not seen him are hazy in the novel. In fact, he lives in a nearby town, so it shouldn't be difficult to go meet him. It is sort of an anticlimactic journey from the start. All they have to do is walk a few miles and pay a visit. The novel takes place in Britain after the death of King Arthur, and as the elderly couple set out, we learn that a mist has spread throughout the land and that it has a peculiar quality of causing confusion and loss of memory. It is a sort of collective amnesia. We do not know for sure what this mist is or why it exists. Perhaps it is a dragon's breath. Perhaps it is the magic of Merlin who wanted peace after all of the fighting. Or perhaps it is the anger of God over all the bloodshed that has happened. In any case, this mist surrounds Axel and Beatrice and is the reason that they cannot remember the details about their son and why they have not seen him in so long. As the novel progresses, more and more memory is recovered. And as that happens, the goals of the couple becomes less clear. What they had originally set out to do, to find their son, is thwarted. And the novel winds its way into other truths, other experiences, other paths. Like life, it leaves off from its original goal and is not a neat trajectory towards that purpose. And because of this, it would be hard to read that book as having much, if anything, to say about grit, but I think that it has a lot to say about life and the discoveries that we make along its winding paths. And perhaps also about no longer denying our experiences and instead honestly grappling with them. Now, I don't want to knock grit too hard. No doubt it is sometimes needed. But if every time we look at the mountain and the answer carved in it is the same, then we may be missing something. Life is more often than not under construction, and I would like to preserve that ambiguity rather than trying to overcome it with force. This day has so much more to offer. My spiritual companions, amen. I love you, and may yours be a day of gladness.